Welcome very, very much to Conversation. It's really a distinct pleasure and honor, if I may, on my immediate left to present to you, as it has been an annual affair, Seth Adler. He's the coordinator, and he's really been one of the major forces holding it together of this thing that's getting really, really large, the Left Forum. It's an annual affair here in New York City, and we're going to be talking about that. And it's so good, as always, to see you. So, Seth, welcome so very much to Conversation. Good. It looks like you got a real lineup coming this year.
Thanks, Harold.
Yeah.
It's good to talk with you again as we do this now each year. And as the Left Forum expands and the conference coming up on May 20th to 22nd, really across the street here at John Jay. It'll bring about 4,000 people out, about 1,200 speakers, artists, poets, musicians, the whole thing. It's got the big stages and the small stages, the workshops, and starts on Friday, ends on Sunday. So it's this long-running affair where people who identify progressive, left, radical, social justice come together.
Yeah, that is good. I guess it has roots back. We were chatting before we started. Paul Sweezy and people. The Left Forum, intellectually organized, has been around for quite a while. But this is moving into new territory. It seems to me that this is a real serious event that's got worldwide implications and notice all around the world.
It's an international conference, and as you indicated, the precursor to the conference was the Socialist Scholars Conference. That ran for about 21 years or so all the way up through the beginning of this century, and that brought thousands of people out, and some of the founders continued on and built the Left Forum in about 2005. This includes Stanley Aronowitz, Francis Fox Piven. You mentioned Paul Sweezy was one of the frequent speakers at the Socialist Scholars when that was held at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. Very exciting, big affair. Left Forum emerged from the CUNY Grad Center, the City University of New York Graduate Center, where we still are in terms of the work we do year-round to make this and other events for an international audience. And, the 10, 12 years ago, Left Forum really started up at the Grad Center, and it became too big for those settings. And, of course, for your experience of the many years, there are wonderful debates and discussions, dialogues. The way that the people who speak and hold workshops and develop their issues on politics, on art, on culture, on science, on justice. They plan these year-round, and so it's very exciting to have all the panels and the workshops where you get a level of debate, a level of discussion, a level of respect for differences that really is unique in the country. Would that there were many other forums like this, Left Forums, but there is this one large one each year, and here it is coming on May 20th when it starts. So we have these large room events with speakers who are well known, and they address pressing topics. And what a year it is to have the Left Forum. If you think about it,
a heck of a year.
A heck of a year. The election cycle is coming to a head with the Democratic Convention, about a month after the forum. And, in some senses, we've got a year when the focus on politics is not just national, but it's international.
Yeah, it probably always has been, but it particularly so now.
Well, very much so.
It's one for the books, I think you could say. This one with Mr. T, Mr. Trump, and so forth, and everything is really something else. I wonder, are there venues that have such a pedigree, as it were, a length, elsewhere in the country or the world that you count as like sister institutions? Because this idea of colloquium or people getting together and to talk seriously and mingle, it's such a great opportunity for people of like minds or people who are interested in understanding things intellectually or otherwise. Are there more centers that you could relate to it, sister institutions, or, and then also we get to maybe the use of media and media's attention to the things that would come out of the minds and the contributions of the people who attend these forums?
Oh, wonderful questions. Indeed, there are other events and gatherings that are not unlike Left Forum. One of the main ones, which also there's an interaction between the two forums, is the World Social Forum. The World Social Forum.
Yeah, that moves, doesn't it?
It moves from country to country,
yeah,
for
right.
sure.
Yeah.
It developed back in Puerto Alegre, I believe, in Brazil.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll just get this.
And anyway, it's a large gathering. Another gathering, well, tens of thousands go to the World Social Forum. But this year in Montreal, there will be a World Social Forum following the Left Forum, and there's mutual interaction between both.
Okay. Sorry, I did a little call. I had to get that out of the way. So, okay. Yes, so that's good. There's more and more interest in terms of understanding, and that Robert J. Lifton is a John Jay College guy, major guy. Mm-hmm. Was a major professor there, and the John Jay College is a tremendous forum. That building is so huge. It used to be just up on 10th Avenue and 58th. It's the whole avenue now. And it's like inside of an aircraft carrier. It's so big and
it's a beautiful conference center.
Uh-huh.
It's very open. Left Forum has one of the biggest yearly book and grassroots organization fairs in the area. Uh-huh. And because of that, you have both the book publishers, the progressive book publishers come and they show their books, their speakers, their authors come and do panels. You also have grassroots organizations. I should add that, back to your original question, it is a place of sort of dialogue, discussion, debate, but it's also a place that develops action. So many of the social justice groups, the movements, Black Lives Matter, the immigrants' rights movements, the community organizations, they come to Left Forum not just to, think through critical issues and explore strategies. They come in making plans before the forum, engaging others throughout the country and building their networks, building the social movement, so to speak. Sure. So Left Forum has in sort of its history developed to bring on both this activist element, the creative activists, and of course the activism of the mind is a very important part of the whole experience too. Yeah. So when we talk about some of the interesting speakers who are coming, each year the history of the Left Forum has had people that you and I know well. So whether it's Harry Belafonte, Angela Davis, Michael Moore, Noam Chomsky, Amy Goodman. We know the people who have come and really sort of graced the small and large stages. This year we have a whole host of very exciting speakers, and they speak at these large plenary engagements. There's really just, it's a very inviting atmosphere. It's almost nothing to get in, and Left Forum has remained that way for its 12 years. And therefore, one can hear good jazz or comedy or so forth in the afternoons at the Black Box Theater, and in the evenings they can hear some of the well-known speakers, and in the day they have each of the 2-hour sessions to pick between almost 70 panels and events at any 2 hours, including ones that you've done over the years.
Well, we've done some here myself. It's like a feast of intellectual thinking and everything, and a great deal of mingling and intermingling. It's been like that from the beginning, back down in the days when it was at the college downtown Socialist Scholars Convention and everything. It's a great thing, and I'm really glad you were able to put it together. You name all these people that are major voices that we're reading and paying attention to all year long. It's good to get together, with them.
Absolutely. Just to, some of the big events that sort of sandwich the daytime events include a Friday evening plenary. All the plenaries are focused on the different themes that are current in time. Friday evening we start with a title, Capitalism and Militarism at Humanity's Peril, Organizing Our Power. Capitalism and Militarism at Humanity's Peril, Organizing Our Power. The speakers will be names that you probably know. Tariq Ali.
Yeah, sure.
So Tariq, one of the founders of Verso Books, also editor of the New Left Review, that venerable, wonderful journal that's stood for a long time. Tariq is one of the keynote speakers. He's a globalist in so many ways, and his presence politically and intellectually is indelible and irreplaceable. He'll be one of the keynote speakers. Joining him will be Medea Benjamin.
Oh, yeah, she's a pistol,
Medea Benjamin, as we know, is one of the great activists, but also one of the great international
troublemaker.
Engagers,
good troublemaker. There's good troublemaker,
thought-provoking in a way that even President Obama acknowledged at that press conference. This is somebody who may be protesting, but folks, you better listen to her. Most recently, she helped to engage.
That actually happened. We got that
That's
on tape, do we? We ought to put that over on a loop or something. Good, But she's wonderful,
And what she did most recently, she helped with Code Pink to organize the conference, the Forum on Saudi Arabia. There aren't that many forums on Saudi Arabia in the United States. This was a critical, exciting thing, and Medea brings that knowledge and her long work with Global Exchange to this plenary on capitalism and militarism at humanity's peril, organizing our power. The third speaker is another speaker that comes frequently to Left Forum. It's Chris Hedges.
Oh, he's a major moral voice. Major.
Yeah, exactly.
Major.
So
been around forever, it seems, in saying good critique.
His background is theological, moral and political background, and Chris is compelling, challenges people to really think, what's the scope of our politics and lives today that compels us to take the revolutionary challenge seriously. This will be moderated by Laura Flanders, and we'll also have some music in some of the plenaries and during the days. Matt Cedillo will likely give a little sort of intro to the whole thing on Friday night. Saturday night, if we're talking about these large events, is yet another, I think, important topic. The title of that one is Black Liberation and the Sanders Groundswell, Prospects for Left Unity. Black Liberation and the Sanders Groundswell, Prospects for Left Unity. That one will feature the socialist city council member of Seattle, Sharma Sawant.
Was he there at the Seattle Business Back movement? Was it 92 or when was it they had the
She was elected recently and re-elected, and she's part of that campaign for 15. One of the only socialists in political office in this country.
The battle in Seattle was a major one. When was that?
Yes, in the early 90s.
Yeah, right. That was a major
part of the wave that brought people like Sharma and the Socialist Alternative Party that she's part of forward. Joining her will be August Nimps. August Nimps is a great historian, I believe from the University of Minnesota. And he will be joined also by Kianga Yamada-Taylor. Now, Kianga just wrote a book on Black liberation. And so you think about these issues. What are the importance for people coming to hear, be enlightened or be challenged by these issues? The Sanders Groundswell, of course, is something quite extraordinary.
That's something right in the news, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can talk some about that, too. What
Absolutely.
What the feeling is by those people about that. Go ahead. We could. I think it'd be worth talking about that.
Well, for Left Forum, it's
right
quite
before us now.
It's quite extraordinary that for young people, probably 8 out of 10 young people, and that's who, voting for Sanders or mobilizing for Sanders, 8 out of 10 are very receptive not just to a message that he calls a socialist message, but it's also to the idea of socialism. Who would think over the decades that you and I, and you can remember back to forms of anti-communism, anti-socialism, equating all that sort of on this left spectrum of the socialist identification, not with Eugene Debs, but with Stalin. You can remember back to that, the bitter, horrible days of the House Un-American Activities and what happened to politics that were progressive to left politics in this country. And you fast forward to a time when I think the good news is that the receptiveness to thinking on a large scale about systemic, systems-wide, global, national, regional, and local alternatives to the current economistic sort of onslaught of really unequal control over politics, economy, and culture. When you think how far we've come in some ways, it's a grand thing in many ways that at Left Forum, one of the great debates will be how much does the Sanders groundswell mean for a real political revolution? What is a political revolution?
That's a biggie.
What is the anger? What are the rebellions that are taking place in the anti-racist and black freedom movements, and how do they relate to the electoral arena, which seems to promise so little for changes in everyday life?
Yeah, and that is a big theme that's right in the cards before us now. And then we have this phenomenon of Mr. Trump on the right. In a very real sense, he is also gaining a great deal of attention from people who question the Washington consensus that has been largely responsible for running the country from the right. So there's opposition to what has been being manifest by both Trump in a certain kind of way and the people that are in line with him. They think there's something there. And also particularly, I would think, by this phenomena of Mr. Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he thinks he can maybe actually pull off a major transformation of the society that has been heralded, but it still just has a way of retreating back into the old ways, the traditional ways, usually, and the leading edge of criticism usually doesn't get a chance to really establish itself, only just partly or partially. But he's talking about a major transformation that seems to be having effect to where he might actually pull it off.
Well, it's very interesting to think about this from the strategic point of view.
Yeah.
That is, from those many activists and you could say organizations and others that consider themselves in a spectrum of politics that are left, radical, revolutionary, social justice based. That is, what are the orientations towards this electoral arena politics in which the possibility, although probably challenging and maybe even not likely, is that a Sanders will move all the way up with a dialogue around socialism to the actual nomination. So to think about this,
you or the people you're ensconced within this world that you're laying out a lot of the people's in a sense. You're involved with them in a way. Do you think that that's beginning to? When first he announced, it was a joke. When Mr. Trump announced, it was a joke. That the old way will work. You just have to get your delegate counts and you get your people in place. And the old way, the traditional way, Democrat, Republican, will work as always it has.
Well,
you know,
Harold,
and now it's talking where they're actually thinking something might revolutionarily happen in real time and on a real basis, rather than just words that have to be co-opted by the system that has been in place for a long time and will continue. And that's the attitude that is to be seen if you look back through history, it seems.
Sometimes it's good, and this is from my experience at Left Forum and what will be debated, to see that there's a difference between looking at the Sanders groundswell.
Yeah.
That is, the mobilizations in the communities, the attitudes and sort of excitement that many people in social movements are developing, and even the left political parties, and how they're orienting to the groundswell compared to the candidate's actual election. It can be sort of analyzed that way very productively, and it will be done in probably 10s, 20s, 30s of panels at Left Forum. And if you think of it that way, you could also see that the groundswell itself is very exciting almost across the spectrum
Yeah.
to a huge
80%.
number of left organizations, and yet there's critique there too.
Yeah.
Part of the
well,
critique
there would be
is,
among those people. You're not going to get.
and why to look at it as a groundswell
marching.
compared to just the election of a candidate is if you look at the structures of power, the structures of economy, culture, knowledge, and power, one can see that within the two major parties, given the convulsions are taking place in both parties, but much more on that right side in the Republican Party. But with the Democratic Party elite, that revolving door between the biggest corporations and the seats of power in all of the elements of control over the many years of patronage politics in the style that the Democratic Party brought up, finds levels of control, consolidation, co-optation, and denial of the political revolutionary expressions of this huge amount of social movement energy. Like in the Obama election, the first one of 2008, the moment Obama was elected, though, Harold, there were millions of young people who wanted to go to the campaign headquarters the next day and say, okay, now where do we start?
Yeah, right.
Where do we really make the change?
Have it ready by next week.
Not just through Obama, but the Democratic Party elite. This includes people like James Carville, the somewhat famous campaign strategist, locked the doors, locked the databases, locked the cell phone numbers and the text numbers, and so the social movements that built up were virtually physically closed out of any form of combining themselves and going to push Obama to be something more than accommodationalist to the corporate capitalist structure of finance, of industry, and business generally that has very clearly been not just predominant, but has consolidated its hold with a perilous effect to the worldwide stability. So the question of the Sanders groundswell compared to the Sanders election is an important one, because you will find left parties and others oriented commonly towards being excited by the groundswell, while at the same time that groundswell is in itself so electoral focused that the questions coming up at Left Forum, including the role of black liberation and the struggles that are really blossoming in the country today through Black Lives Matters, that these type of movements can be maybe more connected and more acknowledged as needing each other. That hasn't happened yet in any major way, and so the groundswell looks like it has some great perilous challenges. These will be discussed at the Left Forum.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. I look back over the time. I'm a little bit older and everything like that, but I was born into the 30s and everything, and we had a tremendous rend of the society in the Great Depression. It was a terrible thing, and Mr. Roosevelt came to the fore, and they did get a number of things to address that, but historically what he's remembered for in many, many quarters, and I'd bring it up, I wonder if I could, just a couple minutes, that he's remembered in many quarters, as was Mr. Obama in a certain way. Make a comparison maybe that might be or may not be relevant, I'm not sure. But he was remembered for the WPA. He was, Buddy, can you spare a dime? John Steinbeck and Grapes of Wrath and these kind of things. And Yarborough and he's remembered for that thing. But he was also primarily remembered as the person who saved capitalism. Okay? That's interesting. He was coming from the left, a lot of the things that were progressive, called progressive and so forth. And so I just reread the book by Geithner, Timothy Geithner, who directed what was going on when the economy almost fell apart more recently. You remember. And it's interesting because in that's coming from the defenders of the system. And defending Mr. Roosevelt for saving capitalism is interesting in the leftist circles and that. But wait, so it's a little bit more inclusive than left. But that book also claimed that it was a major thing that Mr. Obama did in the throes of what the risk was to the human society, was that, again, he is to be celebrated historically for having saved capitalism, that if it had happened the way many of the voices of long 200,000 years of oppression by a societal organization of human activity, if that had been able to be done, it would have resulted, their claim, it would have resulted in a tremendous anarchistic total disassociation of the whole society, would be disastrous on a monumental line if you didn't have the system saved. And I wonder if maybe you could, that's their take on it. It has to be saved, some gains garnered, some gains incorporated in the slow development sociologically, politically, economically, intellectually, and so forth. Harold, I wonder if you could comment on that.
I doubt that.
Or do you see things differently?
You know, I doubt that Geithner, as well as FDR, funny putting the two together, would be that, you know, that much concerned with anarchy breaking out, as you say, or that the idea of a left or left thought, left politics is, you know, in some ways more limited than others. Just personally, I tend not to overgeneralize about these systems, so that one can see the word capitalism, which is an important entry point to try to think about how people's lives are both moved forward cooperatively as well as through exploitation. I don't necessarily think about think about these as blanket ideas and essences that exist just as one way or the other. You know, the word neoliberal capitalism has emerged in this era where it looks like the financial institutions have garnered ever greater power and control, even in collusion with the state. And you mentioned Geithner. So Geithner might be said to have sort of put forward a role of the federal government in assisting not the poor, not the working people, not the people who've lost their homes, not the people who cannot afford health care, but much more a very small fraction, a less than 1/10 of 1% of the corporate billionaires within financial institutions, within the insurance institutions, and within the corporate institutions. We know that GM got a bailout. We know that the American Insurance Group got a bailout, and so forth. So that a complete sort of class collaboration, which had racial, gender, and cultural dynamics that were devastating for the country in the sense of creating conditions of much more peril, stands behind that bailout, which even the liberals, who I don't think saw anarchy as an alternative, like Paul Krugman, you know, basically said, okay, let's do a bailout, but let's put it to the working people, let's put it to the poor. If we're going to do $2 trillion of quantitative easing, this is a term which basically, as the Republicans and the right-wingers said, that's just printing money. Well, no, it's buying up debt, but it is, in a sense, non-debt related production of monetary power. Krugman basically said, let's produce 10 trillion of that and put it into the infrastructure, into the working people, and so forth. So even he, not seeing anarchy as an alternative, saw the potential for Paul Krugman. The economist Krugman even took a liberal stance that had its left implications. But when we think about this in terms of systems that change, capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, others will call it the free market or market system, socialism, not of just the Soviet era or not just of the Chinese era, and not just from Latin America, which has many different types of socialism, but also coming up through the U.S. in forms of systemic transformation of everyday life. These type of ideas are on the minds of hundreds of millions of people now, and not in a negative way. Once you de-essentialize, or you don't see these as an essence, you see it as a political struggle, as a struggle with class dimensions and others, then we can think, yes, the systematic practices of a Federal Reserve, of the governmental elite, and of the corporate billionaires and the mega corporations that have concentrated wealth to their own peril of not being able to even even experience a world that's productive enough to purchase those goods. If we think about it systematically through the way that people lose parts of their labor, parts of their work to the corporate elite, you can see these are systems. The words capitalism and socialism do fairly well in allowing us to think, what are the transformations, not as one different from the other, but that are already taking place in workplaces, in state and politics. So we have cooperatives around the world, from Mondragon in Spain that has 60,000 people to Cleveland and LA and other places where the cooperative spirit of all the workers basically owning and making decisions about their work are transforming the way that people feel work every day, and also changing systems within, you could say, larger milieus that are not always friendly to those changes.
Yeah, I would say that includes almost all of human history. It seems to me, if you look at human history, you've never had a situation, I guess you had some cooperation among people who were nested in, villages and things and that. But on the whole, ever since the Neolithic anyway, you've had systems where you had a few people running everything, and most of the people were wallowing around in the mud. For most of history, I'm afraid that's the case. There were always a leadership quality to the people, and whether it was Nebuchadnezzar or the Pharaoh or Rome for 1,000 years, and 1,000 years after Rome, you had hereditary families living off gold plates up in the castle on the hill, and the people wallowing around in necessarily materialistic squalor, because we didn't have developed a system that might be promising something different than all of history. But I don't think that you can say that the answers are to be found in history, because they just continue. In fact, that represents the system in place that Mr. Sanders and Trump are railing against. The system in place, run by a system that serves the interests of the powerful. It's called realpolitik. It still rules.
So,
Harold, I would submit.
Of what you've proposed before and done at the Left Forum, when you talk about the end of material scarcity,
well, that's
of course, in many respects, it is likely thinking of people cooperating a different way on a more equal basis to really end material scarcity. But similar, if you go back in history, it's not always just the elite or just a ruling class or a ruling way. So you read Karl Polanyi on the Torrebrand Islanders.
Yeah.
You look at the indigenous, the Native Americans and other forms of societies that are so profoundly more cooperative and sharing every day, that use forms of consensus and other ways of thinking that are now current and growing in the left movements around the world.
Those
Spain, Portugal,
have been conquered by military power.
Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, they're all changing in terms of the types of politics that are emerging, that are more cooperative politics, that are not just a party politics. You look at the indignados in Spain and the movements in the plazas where hundreds of thousands of people gathered to decide their community lives, to decide their political lives. And out of it came, even today, political organizations like Podemos, which come to the Left Forum, that do not share the same idea of all hierarchical or all representative forms of politics. They mix more consensus, more horizontal politics. Portugal has just had a transformation towards the emergence of a strong left coalition, which is not just socialist in the old-fashioned way of some of the parties of socialism in Europe, but also in the ways of being more insistent on horizontal types of democracy, expression, and transformations of wealth to the many. So, Harold, just to say, over the time in history, you find many examples, as many or more, of cooperative societies as you do of what you might say are the unequal societies.
Very interesting.
And
that's very interesting. And certainly you have all of the... I know I spent a year and a half among the Aymara people in Bolivia, indigenous population, and you've got indigenous populations here, the Sioux Indians, and the people who live very close and are closely related in a cooperative way. The Aztecs used to have some violence up on the top of those pyramids and so forth, and I'm not sure that it was all pristine pure, but I think most of those systems that have had that quality have been conquered by the people with the guns.
So
And that's an overriding history of it. It's called realpolitik, not idealism.
Well-
and so idealism is in another order. It calls for something other than the system in place. Seems to me, again, both Mr. Trump and Mr. Sanders are questioning that idea. Let's just stick with the good old ways and the way that it's been, and everything's going to be okay. And that's the history of the world, run by the people who are the power structure that run things.
So there's no.
I don't know. It seems
no
that way
doubt
to
the
me.
groundswells that are emerging and the
Are-
anger,
yes.
the rage of
Now
people
you may be
against
coming to
alienation.
something. You may be coming to something
is
now,
moving
but it
forward.
hasn't been characteristic of
So,
history.
but speaking
The
of
poor have been ground down.
Harold, speaking of the militarism which you're
Oh, well,
talking
yeah,
about, and
yeah.
now with the sort of industrialization and the technological revolutions and automation, we've got
That's a
we've
different
got
ballgame, yeah.
forms of military expression that are not just undemocratic. They violate international law. The use of drones and robotic
Isn't that
warfare
something?
is only on the rise.
Yeah.
Left Forum is a place where peace movements and others come
Yeah.
to be able to gather together and talk about how do we stop this? How do we
Yeah,
understand
okay,
this?
yeah.
So just speaking about the many sort of panels and what's going on Saturday night with the issue of capitalism and militarism at humanity's peril, organizing our power,
Yeah.
these discussions, Tariq Ali is one
Yeah,
of the
he's very
great sort of
articulate, yeah.
international proponents
Yeah.
of disarmament, peace, of transformations in the socialist direction, as is Medea Benjamin and Chris Hedges. They
Yeah.
have different views, but they do go beyond the important realm of left and progressive policy making. So in many senses, one of the great challenges
Yeah.
around how to demilitarize everyday life, because it's not just on the level of the Middle East and Syria,
Yeah.
not just on the level of Benghazi and Libya and the erasure of 20 to 30,000 lives there. It's not just on the level of the refugees coming from North Africa and Syria to Europe, which seems to bode for a turn to the right. It's also on the level of what police do every day
Yeah.
in communities,
You're right
what
about
type
that,
of
yeah,
armor
yeah.
they're wearing, what type of approach to so-called peacekeeping and community uplift in terms of economic and cultural forms is being sacrificed for the increasing militarization and securitization of our world. These issues are addressed at Left Forum. They
Yeah.
have to be addressed.
And you're
And
right
just
on
to
that, yeah.
put forward why the systems form of thinking, the thinking about socialism, the thinking about capitalism, the thinking about transformations on larger scales that won't be as alienating to a population, why the horizontal democracy, what does that have to do with militarism? Well, at very basic levels, we can get caught up in the arguments of the Middle East and what are the solutions there. We could say, yes, a two-state solution or a single-state solution with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict are what is emerging and what's important. We can say Saudi Arabia has certain qualities of this very repressive regime that is doing damage well beyond its borders. Yes, we can look at that, and speakers who have come like Michael Clare and Phyllis Bennis and others say wonderful things too, but at the same time, they don't as much talk about the need for the social political mobilizations, to think about systems change, to think about
now
forms
you're
of
talking
socialism.
If I may,
and,
you're talking
and
about
Harold,
something different. If you're
this
talking
bring-
about something different, then I may have overstated the history. I think the history of the world is more or less that which I laid out. I submit, and it's okay to do that, but that we may, and it's a little bit hard to do, but we may, and I am all for it, we may be actually thinking that that's been a long gestation period. I don't know. You could see there was a certain thing. We couldn't in 2000 fly in an airplane to California. We were making progress, slow material progress over the whole long tide of human affairs. And it may be that we're coming into a time of qualitative transformation at the level of material reality that does perhaps now, in the near-term future, herald a material condition that exists that has the promise of being able to provide for all in an equitable way, whereas in history, it always had to be zero-sum because there wasn't nearly enough. It was scarcity, and it had to be for one to win, someone else had to lose. We may be actually coming to a time in our generation, let me finish, that is qualitatively transformed out of all of human history. Now, people look away from that kind of thinking, but that might actually be what Mr. Bernie's calling on, and it may be actually echoing the feelings within the masses of the people that there is something new possible where everybody can be. They never could have been out of history because there wasn't, in terms of the material sustenance and the material capability of the human society and the extended technological capability of their consciousness and so forth, to bring about a situation where there was, in fact, material scarcity was being transcended at the level of capability. We may be coming to that now, which is interesting. But I'm not sure that it's going to come out of the political fighting that took place in the name of socialism or capitalism out of the past.
Harold, once again,
we need something new.
There are different historical views.
Yes,
I don't
indeed.
share a historical view that material scarcity is the only frame to think about how peoples in various indigenous groups were not facing scarcity in the way that you're pointing out.
Collectively.
Again, when you look at the anthropologists, whether it's and not just the anthropologists, the political economists and other. Carl Polanyi is one of the great ones. The Great Transformation talks about different societies. But you can go through anthropology and others and see many societies that were doing just fine. Smaller societies and sharing. And so I hear a perspective and a set of assumptions about material scarcity, and I personally don't buy it the same way.
Okay, good.
Nonetheless, if you think about
nobody could realize, nobody can say that without being locked up in a booby hatch. Everybody knows, just like they knew we were the center of the universe when we didn't have a telescope. The material reality did not allow us to have a view or a systems view. Now we have that, perhaps. Now, if you want, anthropology is too narrow. Fuller is somebody you could bring up. That's worth taking attention to, is the representations of systems thinkers, or Michio Kaku, or some of the major thinkers who are thinking systemically beyond the narrow confines of political argumentation.
In the same way you're pointing out how, as you call, idealists are in some ways opening up different views, and socialism has a different sense now through the Sanders groundswell and through the many political left parties that are starting to express it to.
But it's coming on the right as well. It's coming
masses of people. Harold, in that same way, you know, you might say the idealists may be having a day, and the hope for change is there. You have to think about, we're talking about a world that will likely be 6 degrees warmer in, decades, and this is not a world that can easily sustain us even with the best of technologies. So the need to make connections, the need not to see the Black Lives Matter and the immigrant rights and the other struggles as separate, but as bases for uniting in common respect and crossing this sort of intersectional forms of identifications to form a stronger base, leftward bound. That's already happening in the world.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the fact of the military and all of that, because that's been the major way in which the powers that be have been able to assert their authority, is with military power. It's called realpolitik again, and that system has finally, to make an argument for something other than the normal way of thinking that is left and right and all of that, that is coming to an end. You got Thomas Piketty's coming up with very interesting analysis of things and so forth. But on the weapons thing, that has been the basis for establishing political legitimacy. You have soldiers, you set them up, you make creation stories up, you make up PR and so forth for your team better than the other, and they fight, and that's the history of the world. But no, let me finish the point, if I may. That the weapons systems, or that game, or that thing of whoever's got the power to coerce, and then people can come to be in a league with that particular thing and so forth, is being challenged now, because the weapons now, currently, it should be brought, I wonder if it will be brought up, the weapons, I think maybe those that are on the Trident submarine fleets of our oceans have the ability, if they're unleashed, in their capability, if they're unleashed and some sort of crazy, irrational thing happens, apparently it would mean the end of our species. Do you think that's true? That's a new political reality. That's a new reality at a level of capability. On the other hand, the other side of that equation is, do you think we've transcended material scarcity? Do you think we can finally, after 200,000 years of evolution, understand the evolutionary process and say there is enough for all? Everybody, there is enough. There wasn't ever, but there is now. That we can destroy or we can liberate the whole Homo sapien species in a way that's never been characteristic of history, ought to be brought up possibly once in a while as a possible ontologic reality. It's never mentioned, never can be, because everybody knows there's not nearly enough. Only politics over scarce resources is the only way we can see the world.
Harold, I'm not sure who's interviewing who here. I hear, a
well,
fair
I
amount.
So you talked a lot. You talked a lot, laying out all the things. That's fine, and
so,
that's fine.
So just to get to the issue of militarism, which at Left Forum is a very important issue. People talk about Latin America and the changes in Latin America, Venezuela, Bolivia, Brazil. What's happening there? What's happening in Colombia? These are issues that many people come and address because not only are families spread from New York and from this international conference throughout the world, but the concerns to move towards more peaceful, more democratic, more socialistic types of forms of sharing and love, this is what is emerging. And what I was saying earlier that I think enervated you is that militarization and capitalism are two notions that need to be tied together, because the military-industrial complex and the prison-industrial complex are interrelated in the privatization and the move forth secured by not commodification, not the so-called way that the free market is supposed to work, or the capitalist market is supposed to work in theory and in practice of the economists, but actually in the state moving massive amounts of human resources, of human energy, of human ideas towards the prison industrial complex and exploiting labor throughout the systems with the privatizations of the jails, not just for people who are so-called citizens, but for people who are migrating and getting thrown in these detention centers that are run from by the biggest corporations in the world, not because they can make a market, because us human beings by market theory want to purchase jails and want to purchase nuclear weapons, because the state corporate lock is at such a point where the profit-making imperative has, as Naomi Klein said, become vampiric. It's gone off the rails, not because the CEOs and the board of directors are doing what they don't want to do, because they are acting the way they should act in trying to maximize profits. So when it comes to left-wing possibilities for militarism and capitalism, they are interconnected. And as I was saying earlier, the great policy analysts focusing us on policy, saying, here's what needs to happen with Saudi Arabia, here's what needs to happen with a greater conciliation with Iran, here's what needs to happen with Yemen and Libya, those are important. But they also tend to take people's eyes in a progressive and radical potential or imagination away from the importance of transforming conditions that are locked, interrelated in systemic forms. That's why the emergence of the term socialism and the analysis behind it is emerging in a grand way in the United States. That's why the traditions of both Murray Bookchin in The Anarchist, and that's why the traditions in Karl Marx and the labor theory of value are actually being taken up again.
I don't think it's going to work.
And while I hear what you're saying, you have to know that Harold, it doesn't really matter as much what you and I think. One of the great benefits of being at the Left Forum, and it's a privilege for me to have seen over many years doing this, is what's emerging around the world in the rethinking, in the rebuilding building of these traditions, the anarchist tradition, the Marxist tradition, the anti-colonialist traditions, the anti-racist traditions, these liberation, freedom traditions are emerging. And so a word like socialism, a word like structural racism, these are terms that are becoming more and more important in their interrelationships and not their separations.
I think it's very, very interesting. It's just so small in its way of thinking, that's all. I mean, it's just having an argumentation that's gone on and so forth. I'm not against all of that. That's great. Everybody wants everybody to be free. It's good. And you got an idea that's good. But what I'm trying to say is above and beyond all that, there should be some thinking at a systems level of what's going on. If I may, in economics, it's a different proposition if there is, in a collectivist sense, by what we mean to be a have in a world that is able to provide great numbers of and it's going exponential. Everything is going exponential. The information technologies are going to robotics. What's his name? Murray Bookchin saw that. Kurzweil have seen that. It's going exponential, and what's happening is the productive process is increasingly becoming more a matter of capital instruments creating the productive capability. The labor is less and less relevant to production than it has been throughout history. And it's all owned by a tiny plutocratic class, and the left allows it to go. I mean, the left just goes along with it, and all you got to do is create jobs for everyone, and they're being displaced. Mr. Piketty is being read by the political leadership of the world, seems to me, capitalism in the 20th century, and he says the problem is we have a tremendous capability of providing for everybody. It ought to be said once in a while, there is enough. That's my claim. New, it's never been. We've built, like pregnancy. You can't have a birth 6 months into a pregnancy. It's gone through a pregnancy of a condition. And that that's a different thing. He says the main problem is you're going to be displacing labor because they can take over the productive process. You don't need labor to do things that they've had to have to get production. And so what they don't have is a way of distributing to the masses of the people effective buying power to clear the market. They don't have a system that allows them to have a piece of ownership of the technology that's producing the wealth. That would be part of a capitalist critique, not one that's going to overthrow it or something. I don't think those kind of systems didn't work well in the Soviet Union, did it? And that's the major problem that the world citizens, the world leadership is concerned with, and they ought to be. And we ought to have a different way of forming capital and distributing buying power to the masses of the people so that they can form the market, effective buying power of the masses of the world to consume the good liberating capability that is now materialistically available to us, newly so in an evolutionary sense. It should be brought up somewhere rather than the old ideas of left and right and all that kind of thing.
So in our trajectory in the program,
and
Harold,
it's good there's a place where it's left. I mean, certainly there's much more there to be celebrated than what you might find on the lunatic fringes of the right.
So in our trajectory, bringing people back to Left Forum and what's going on there, we've sort of got through 2 nights and not all the daytimes when people can come. As they say, 1,200 workshop facilitators and speakers gives you a huge diversity where even the idea of the word left is not really the only way to think about that. This is progressive, this is radical, this is revolutionary, this is social justice, this is a whole milieu of people coming together and yes, making decisions that this realm of politics and culture needs to be expanded. So moving towards the Friday, Saturday, Sunday days of Left Forum.
We got 5 minutes. Okay, lay it out.
We also have a closing plenary with the philosopher who's been called the Elvis of philosophy.
Elvis.
That's Slavoj Žižek.
Oh,
Amy Goodman and Slavoj Žižek will have the closing program. That program is entitled Rage, Rebellion, Organizing Our Power. A Hegelian triad. Now,
Hegelian,
Slavoj is
okay,
one of the great philosophers who's basically translated Hegel's works into his native tongue, but also is one of the great left sort of political philosophers. He's very provocative. He has much to say about democracy, liberal democracy, his critique of liberal democracy, his call for communism with a small c will all be discussed. So we move through all of these days, and again, we start with Friday with featured panels. We'll have panels on the World Social Forum, panel on Rosa Luxemburg as a revolutionary with Chris Hedges again, Richard Wolff, as well as Laura Flanders. We'll also have people from the internet sort of revolutionary milieu, which includes the May 1st People's Links. We'll do a series of workshops which engage people with technology, but also with the threats of the great surveillance state and others that we need to know about. Practice again. We'll have a panel that will deal with the theft of democracy, that is the real degradation of democracy throughout this country, where voter fraud and voter regulations are not really, in one sense, being put forth to the people at the level the fraud is being put forth by the political elites.
Yeah, right. You're right on that.
You know, these are those type of issues that Left Forum covers oh so well.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And it's good that it's got a chance for that to come together. What is there on the right? It doesn't seem to me there's anything on the right that has anything like the moral suasion and the importance of the Left Forum and the people that are on what we call the left.
You know,
where do we find something that is on the right that what's motivating the thing that looks like might take over, maybe destroy, I don't know, the Republican Party, this phenomena of Donald Trump. He's got commanding leads and everything. What's motivating that anguish and that anger?
It's good.
And can there be a meeting of the ways, a combination, something that subsumes it all? And what is the basis of what can consume all the discontent, even as we have a tremendous capability to provide, and it's growing exponentially, and to destroy.
Harold?
Okay, that's my point.
I got your question. Okay. Over the years, we've talked about this, and we've had this discussion before. And I've said to you that your appeal for a concerned citizens forum and so forth makes sense, but it is no more or no less political and ideological a capture of people's minds and energies than a left forum or a right forum. There is no more or less political ideological captures in any one of those. I choose, and thousands of people coming, not like a right forum, thousands of people coming to a left forum choose that at this moment, that as important as it may seem to have a concerned citizens forum for many people, it's more important to us to build up the politics of a very fragmented and alienated spectrum of progressive to revolutionary activists and thinkers. And the word left in this point in time in the world, there are left parties. It's not just one thing, it's 1,000 different things.
And it ought to be celebrated, it ought to be celebrated in New York, and we've run out of time. We're running out of time, brother, on this planet, and we're running out of time. And this is a very important place for everybody to be in order to get a taking on what's going on, a responsible undertaking of understanding what's going on. Left Forum's a great event, and I thank you very much for having put that together in the long list of people, and it's an amazing thing that one and all ought to try and get over to, and there ought to be more events like that going on in order to help an informed society find the right path forward. It's a very crucial time. Thank you for viewing. Please tune in. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. That's it. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome. See everybody at the conference.
Never enough time to get it all in. Yeah. Thanks for viewing. We'll come back tomorrow. Okay. You ran out of time.
Well, remember in the beginning, Harold, I said...
In the beginning.
No, I said, hopefully we can make this an interview of me, but I know I provoke you.
You just took it all over. You were going to give a running thing.
But what's
that's
wrong
okay.
with that?
That's okay. I let you go for about 25 minutes.
If a person comes to be interviewed, that's nothing wrong with that.
No, it's not an interview. It's a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a political speech, and that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, I thought so, but nobody else. I'm the only person in the world that I can. I'm the only. You got millions of people. I'm the only person I can talk to. I mean, think of that. How would you like to be in that position? I've got to make a call to that guy.
Yeah, he called right during the program.
I'm not sure if it was he or not.
That really took us off.
Dial the number, or tell me the number.
That really took us off that phone call, Harold.
Here, come on. Fuck it. Wait a minute. 1-239-530.
530. Zero's way on the bottom. Yes, there it is. There you go. 8080.
Oh, I messed up. Okay, I gotta do it again. Once again.
239 530 80.
Wait a minute, I missed a zero.
Valid for you?
No, yeah, look, is that?
No, that's...
Yeah, you do it. I don't know how to make the technology work.
You know, the new phones, Harold.
I know.
All you do
I
is
can't
you turn them on.
I know, I can't afford them. I'm just living on Social Security. I got nothing.
This costs $65.
Maybe I could manage that if I pull it, if I tighten my belt. Also, I get confused by the technology. It confuses me.
Yeah, it takes...
I'm old guy.
It takes a discipline for intricate detail.
I hate detail.
Yeah.
I like pattern.
I know.
I don't care about detail. I like pattern. That's why I like conversation. And conversation is not linear. It's not linear.
There you go. I pressed it. It's going to ring.
Hello, Kremlin? Trump headquarters? I don't know if I'm going to get...
He doesn't answer the phone.
Well...
Is it ringing?
Yeah, it did. It's going message. Yeah, hello. Hello. Yeah, it's Harold calling again. We're late. We're running late. And left a message twice that we're going to have to, hopefully, it's going to be much better if we can do it as you had wanted to do originally, Frank, the program a week from today. The quality would be much better. I've left a couple messages. There was a call. We were in the middle of taping another program. There was a call. It may have been you. Didn't get a chance to talk. But I'll try and catch up with you. I got to go and tape another program now. And so I'll get in touch with you either later tonight or tomorrow. And I'm sorry about that, but I think it might be good in the end. And we can still get it in time for an effective placement in terms of the big conference in Washington. So that's major. That's a major thing. Okay, I'll have to catch up with you then. Okay, Frank. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay,
Damn, that's too bad.
Yeah. Well, does he answer email?
I don't know.
Maybe if he answers email, you can email him.
Are we in a good conversation? No. I just got his name. Just get a template. And do what? Okay, well, let's do that. And then, Seth here. Wait a minute. Is it in here? It's confusing because I wanted to do that, but we're going to Skype, and he doesn't have, we're going to do it next week. That's not your concern. Let me get this, and that's it. This is